Hey, in this tutorial, we will be continuing part 1 of our pug commission that we started in mixed media. We were doing watercolor and colored pencil. So right now, I'm just applying some watercolor to the paper. I'm starting off on the left-hand side of the dog's ear, and I did that first, but really I started on the eyes first. I find that when you start on the eyes first, you can really frame the picture and really help it come together. So basically right now I'm applying some black paint, almost straight out of the tube, but not quite. I mixed it with a little bit of brown, because I do want to, and it's pretty concentrated, meaning that I didn't add that much water to it, so the concentration is high in it. And I also added a little bit of burnt umber and raw umber for the irises and the colors. So I'm trying to be very light-handed as much as possible. Also, I'm adding in the nose, and I'm using directional strokes. And then something I find that's really important when you're starting your paintings for the fur, usually when I start with the fur, is that I like to go in with my shadows first to establish my darkest spots. But it's important, even when I say go in your shadows, I don't mean go super dark necessarily. It's better to go light at the beginning and then get darker gradually as you continue your drawing. And I'm making sure to follow the pattern and direction of the fur. And I'm continuing that thing over to the ear too as well. I'm just kind of going around it, and it gradually gets darker and darker. And then I believe I'm mixing, for this part, I mixed up I'm using more of a natural gray, so I mixed up a burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and then I added some I added some water to it. And this makes it a much more natural gray than mixing just black and white, because it actually makes it, you can adjust the warmth or cool of the color based on adding as much burnt umber or ultramarine. If you want to make it warmer, or like of a warmer blackish gray, you add burnt umber, and if you want to make it more of a cool tone blackish gray, you would add ultramarine blue. So it really helps use the color theory, I think, so that's something very important to master. Also, you might notice that in this stage of the drawing, it doesn't look very realistic, and that's okay, because the watercolor part not necessarily meant to be super realistic. This is just to get a base coat of our main colors down. And I'm just applying more watercolor around underneath his chin, underneath the kind of his neck, is what I would say. And I'm doing this continuing the direction of the fur that it's going in. I'm also doing that on his back too. Or I actually don't know if it's adding more black. And then making sure to mix it with some other colors so it doesn't look too, I guess, out of the box or too flat looking, to give it more of a three-dimensional look. And I'm continuing that on. I think a lot of beginners, they just want to go straight in to the watercolor process without actually thinking of where the fur is going in and what the actual, I guess, anatomy of the dog it looks like. So that's really important to focus on that and really analyze it before you start painting. Now what I'm doing right now is I'm adding actually in a light wash of burnt sienna and burnt ochre to make this reddish color, and I think I mixed it with some crimson or something to get this kind of red color. And I'm doing this throughout the whole of his bandana to give a base coat. But something I really want to emphasize something is next to the letters on his bandana, I want to make sure those letters stay very very crisp and have clean edges. So as much as possible, I use the wet on dry technique to get more sharp, crisp, edges, as you would call it. Whereas the wet technique would get you fuzzy, more blurred results, which is what we used in the background. So that's something important to distinguish when you're doing watercolor paintings. I'm using a fine line of black paint going around the circle. And I'm making sure to try to keep this line as fine as possible because it's and as straight also as possible. And there's also more text actually around in this circle that's surrounding the A in his bandana. And you might notice also that the bandana, I'm noticing that the bandana is a little bit muddied right now because we added some, burnt umber over the top of it. So it kind of has a muddy tone. I definitely would not add black over the top of it because that would make it look even more muddy and just too dark for the red tones because it's like a bright, warm red, I would say. So we're going to go over that with watercolor later, and then we'll also go over that with colored pencil when we're adding our details. Now I'm adding in the background part under him, and then what I'm doing is I'm taking some raw umber and mixing that up with some burnt sienna and burnt umber to get that kind of neutral brown tone. Finally, now I'm starting to add in using pencils. Now these colored pencils I'm using again are the Faber-Castell Polychromos, as I discussed in part 1. And I want to make sure that I keep the pencil rather light when I'm first starting, so it doesn't look too, grayed out and stuff. And I'm going around the piece, and this is really where you want to start adding in your details. And I noticed that, first of all, the face is lacking a little bit of detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the indigo blue and black to darken some of those shadows up and really define those clumps of fur. I think an important misconception that a lot of beginner artists have, and just artists that are learning in general have, this was something I had when I started, was that when you're drawing the fur and hair, you need to do every single strand of fur or hair. Now, this may make sense, but in reality, if you do this, it makes it look like you have it's very sketched and outlined, and you don't want it to look sketched and outlined for a realistic drawing. You want to look like it has a volume and have three-dimension features to it. A really important, and I think must-have, that you must have for your drawings is an X-Acto knife. See how I'm adding in details to get in the eyes? An X-Acto knife scrapes away, layers of pencil on the top to reveal previous layers on the bottom, and this kind of creates a detailed effect. Now I'm going over with one of my lighter gray pencils, and it's a cool gray. I believe it's like cold gray 2 or something. And I'm basically just adding in some highlights. I'm not trying to go too many highlights in, and we want this really to look like a pug. Right now it's a little hard to tell that it looks like a pug, so that's why I'm going to add in some more white hairs to make it look more like its age and like a pug. And I'm just shading the direction that it belongs in. I'm adding hairs around the nose and mouth. And making sure to continue to go in directional strokes. And these white highlights, you really should not be pressing that hard because they have black fur. In fact, I would avoid using white for the highlights. I would use something like a light gray or a light blue to really get in those details. But for the purpose of this, I used, a cool white tone to get that in. And I'm just going back in. And also, the X-Acto knife is perfect for fur and stuff if you want to add in fur. Now I'm going in with a colored pencil. One of my warmer orangey reds, and I'm defining and actually changing the hue a little bit of this bandana. I'm making it more warm, and I'm really defining those letters, as you can see. So right now it's kind of hard to tell what they say. And I find that this is a really cool technique, glazing over the top of watercolors. It makes it look really cool and nice. I'm also using the darker red too, and the burnt umber to get in some of those darker shadows, but I'm making sure to be light as much as you can, be very light-handed. And we want to make it look realistic, not representational. Like I said, observational, not representational. I'm just continuing this process as I see it. I'm really taking my time in terms of adding these details. This is not something you should rush. And I'm doing this for a commission as well, if you didn't already know, like I said in part 1. And now I'm using the white polychromos colored pencil. And normally I actually don't use the white polychromos because it's not very, I guess, transparent or opaque. But in this term, it's good at defining, I guess, the letters. Now I'm adding a lighter orange over it. And then just continue to add in, finally I'm adding in the darker strokes for the back, his back. I'm going lines that follow the direction of it. I'm continuing using the black colored pencil in indigo blue. I'm also going to go in with a lighter gray to add in a little bit of highlights too, very subtle highlights, so we don't want to make them too distinct and too, I guess, like prominent. And we're almost done with this part. I'm just adding in more highlights. And this is like a stage where you can kind of judge your drawing part of it. So yeah. And now I'm just finally adding some more darker shadows in. Thank you for watching. In part 3, we will finish this drawing and add in the final details. I'm still going in with the white pencil. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing and visit my Instagram and Facebook. See you later. Bye, everybody.